It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon drive down an empty country road. Nothing seemed unusual until a man noticed two small figures by the roadside standing strangely still. As his truck slowed, he realized they weren't just any strays. Two golden puppies stood upright, tiny paws lifted almost as if they were begging. Their eyes locked onto him with a mixture of desperation and hope, refusing to move away. For a moment he thought it was simply cute, but then something in their trembling bodies and pleading gaze made his stomach tighten. These weren't playful gestures. These puppies weren't begging for food, they were begging for help. The man pulled his truck to the side of the road, dust rising as the tires crunched against gravel. He stepped out slowly, unsure if the puppies would dart away in fear. But to his surprise, they didn't. Instead, both stayed put, their tiny paws raised as if frozen in that pleading gesture. Their tails didn't wag, their ears drooped low. This wasn't the usual playfulness of abandoned strays. Something about them seemed far too deliberate, almost like they were waiting for him. Kneeling down, the man extended his hand. The puppies sniffed cautiously. Then one whimpered softly, pawing at the ground as though trying to speak. The other nudged its sibling closer, almost encouraging it to be brave. The man felt a lump form in his throat. Their ribs were faintly visible, their fur dusty from the roadside. These weren't well-fed farm pups that had wandered off. They were survivors clinging to hope in the only way they knew. He reached into his truck for a small sandwich wrapped in paper from earlier. Tearing it apart, he held a piece out gently. Yet, to his astonishment, neither puppy lunged forward. They sniffed, but instead of eating, they backed away, whimpering again. Their eyes flickered past him, toward the brush that lined the road. It was subtle, but unmistakable. They weren't hungry for food. They wanted something else entirely. The man's curiosity sharpened into unease. The wind carried a faint smell of dust and dry grass, rustling through the thorny shrubs nearby. The puppies turned toward that direction once more, their paws shifting anxiously. Then, as if rehearsed, one barked sharply and trotted a few steps forward, glancing back to see if he would follow. The second did the same, eyes never leaving his face, tail stiff with tension. The man's pulse quickened. Dogs often begged for food, but he had never seen such behavior, almost as if they were pointing, leading, guiding. He looked down the endless stretch of road. No other cars in sight. No houses, no farms. Just him, two desperate puppies, and the mystery of what lay beyond those shrubs. The man swallowed hard, tucking the sandwich back into his pocket. "All right, little ones," he murmured, voice steady but heart racing. "Show me what you want me to see." And with that, he took his first step off the road, following the unlikely guides into the unknown. The man followed cautiously, his boots crunching softly against the dirt path as the puppies trotted ahead. They didn't wander aimlessly the way strays usually did. Instead, they moved with purpose, stopping every few feet to glance back at him. Their eyes carried a strange urgency, a silent plea that tugged at his chest. It wasn't simple wandering. These little ones were guiding him. Each step away from the road deepened the mystery of what he was about to discover. At one point, the man stopped and called softly, "Hey, are you sure about this?" The puppies froze, turned, and whimpered in unison. Then one pawed at the ground again as if trying to draw his attention. He felt an odd shiver. Dogs begged for food, for warmth, for affection. But this was different. These fragile creatures weren't looking for kindness for themselves. They seemed determined to make him see something beyond their own survival. The puppies suddenly darted forward, weaving through tall, brittle grass that swayed in the breeze. The man hurried after them, brushing thorns from his jeans. His heart pounded as the landscape grew eerier. The air felt heavier here, the silence deeper. He tried offering another piece of food, hoping to tempt them, but again they refused, ignoring the morsel completely. Their attention was fixed on a single direction, ears perked, tails stiff. Hunger was not their concern. Something far more pressing occupied their tiny hearts. The man crouched low, trying to read their movements. He noticed how one puppy would push its nose against the other's shoulder, almost reassuring it before looking back at him again. Their teamwork was uncanny, as though they had silently agreed. Together, they would lead this stranger to what mattered most. The man's stomach tightened further. What could possibly drive two helpless pups to behave with such determination? What lay hidden in the brush that they were so desperate for him to find? The puppies whined once more, louder this time, then sprinted a short distance ahead before stopping abruptly. Their paws scratched at the earth, tails wagging in frantic bursts, their eyes wide with insistence. The man felt the weight of their urgency pressing into him, quickening his steps. Something about this behavior was unnatural, almost unsettling. These weren't random strays, they were messengers, and whatever message they carried was buried somewhere up ahead, waiting to be uncovered. The man pushed deeper into the brush, the puppies darting ahead with quick, determined steps. Every so often they'd stop, look back, and whimper as if urging him forward. His breath grew heavier, not just from the uneven terrain, but from the gnawing tension building inside him. The world seemed unnaturally quiet, no birdsong, no rustle of small creatures. Only the sound of his boots on dry earth and the faint cries of two desperate little guides breaking the silence. He ducked under twisted branches, his hand brushing against jagged bark. Thorns tugged at his sleeves, leaving faint scratches. The further he went, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary detour. The puppies weren't wandering toward safety. They were leading him deeper into isolation. The man glanced over his shoulder at the road, now a thin line in the distance. Whatever lay ahead, he was far from help. A ripple of unease coursed through him, but he pressed on. The puppies' behavior grew more frantic. They scratched the ground, sniffed the air, then darted forward again, tails stiff and ears pinned. At one point, the smaller one let out a high-pitched bark and stood frozen, staring into the thicket ahead. The man slowed, every muscle tense. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to stumble upon something important, something hidden from casual eyes. His pulse quickened, echoing in his ears as though warning him that this discovery would change everything. A faint smell reached him, earthy, sour, with a metallic undertone. He wrinkled his nose, uneasy. The puppies whined louder, circling each other anxiously before running ahead once more. All right, the man muttered, forcing himself to follow. His boots sank into softer soil and he noticed faint impressions in the dirt, paw prints but larger than the puppies. Something or someone had been here before. The realization made his chest tighten. This wasn't just about strays. They were leading him into someone's story. At last, the puppies halted near a cluster of dense shrubs. They pawed furiously at the ground, yipping in unison. Their eyes flickered to the man, urging him closer, demanding he look. Heart pounding, he knelt beside them, pulling branches aside with trembling hands. The world seemed to hold its breath in that moment. And then through the leaves and dirt, something unexpected began to take shape. A discovery so startling, he knew life would never feel ordinary again. The man's breath caught as he crouched beside the shrubs. The puppies pawed at the dirt relentlessly, their tiny claws scraping against the earth with frantic urgency. He brushed aside more branches, revealing a patch of ground disturbed by recent movement. The soil was uneven, pressed down in some areas, torn up in others. His pulse quickened. This wasn't just natural wear, something or someone had been here not long ago. The air carried a weight that made his skin prickle uneasily. He scanned the ground more carefully now. Beyond the tiny paw prints of the puppies, he spotted larger tracks. They were faint but visible. Impressions of heavy boots pressed into the dirt, leading away from the shrubs and deeper into the woods. His stomach clenched. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't wanted to be noticed. The prints weren't wandering, they were purposeful, urgent. Each step pressed firmly as though driven by desperation or fear. Nearby, broken branches and scattered leaves told another story. Something or someone had forced their way through quickly. The man ran his fingers along a snapped twig, the break still green and fresh. This wasn't weeks old. It had happened within days, maybe hours. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the puppies who continued to scratch as though trying to uncover more clues. Their whines were sharp, almost mournful, pulling at the corners of his heart. Whatever had happened here had left a heavy mark. Then came the smell again, stronger this time, a mix of damp earth and something metallic, faint but undeniable. He wrinkled his nose, his chest tightening with dread. Instinct told him he wasn't just following strays anymore. He was stepping into the aftermath of something human. His mind raced with questions. Who had been here? Why had they left in such a hurry? And why were these helpless little puppies so desperate for him to see it? The man's throat felt dry as he looked beyond the prints, his gaze following the path that disappeared into the woods. He had a choice, turn back to safety or press forward into uncertainty. But when he glanced at the puppies, their eyes glistened with pleading insistence. Their tiny bodies trembled, but their determination didn't waver. They had led him this far, and now their silent message was clear. Whatever lay ahead wasn't just trouble. It was the heartbreaking truth they needed him to uncover. The man's hands trembled as he pushed aside more of the brush. The puppies whined louder, circling the disturbed soil with frantic urgency. Then, as the dirt shifted beneath his fingers, something small and fragile came into view. An old torn blanket half buried in the ground. His breath caught. Blankets didn't just appear in the middle of nowhere. Someone had placed it here, hidden it away. He tugged it free, the fabric dirty and damp, carrying with it a weight of sorrow. Beneath the blanket lay the faint outline of belongings. A cracked baby bottle, a tiny stuffed toy, its fur matted with mud. His chest tightened painfully as he realized what he was holding. These weren't remnants of camping or travel. These were the traces of a child. His throat burned with the sudden sting of tears. He looked at the puppies, who whimpered softly, their eyes fixed on the items as if they too understood the gravity of what he had found. The ground around the objects told its own story, shallow depressions in the dirt, as if someone had knelt here for a long time. The boot prints pressed deeper, circling back and forth, restless, desperate. His mind spun with questions. Had someone abandoned a child here? Was this a place of hiding or a place of loss? His stomach twisted with dread, a dark thought he didn't want to name pressing against his mind like a shadow refusing to lift. The puppies pressed close to him now, their tiny bodies trembling, tails still but eyes unblinking. They pawed again at the ground, whining, as if urging him to dig deeper. His breath shook as he pushed the dirt aside carefully, praying with every movement that he wouldn't uncover something worse. The silence of the woods pressed around him, heavy, suffocating, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Each second felt like it dragged on forever, the tension unbearable. And then he saw it, the faint shimmer of metal beneath the soil. A locket. He brushed it clean with shaking fingers, revealing a small, delicate necklace, its chain broken but the heart-shaped pendant intact. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded but clear enough. A woman smiling as she cradled a baby in her arms. His chest tightened as realization struck. The puppies hadn't just been begging for help. They had been guarding a painful truth, a fragment of a story buried in the earth waiting to be uncovered. The man's fingers lingered on the locket, the faded photograph burning into his mind. A mother and child, yet here in the middle of nowhere all that remained was a blanket, a bottle, a toy, and desperate puppies. His throat tightened as the implications pressed down on him. Why were these items left behind? What had happened to the family in the picture? The forest around him suddenly felt colder, as if holding the secrets of something too painful to speak aloud. The puppies pawed again at the ground, their soft cries rising into the air like tiny wails. It struck him then, their behavior wasn't random. They hadn't been abandoned at random either. These puppies were tied to this place, tied to the story buried beneath the soil. Their eyes, wide and filled with sorrow, seemed to echo the grief etched into the discarded belongings. They weren't just lost, they were connected to someone who had vanished here. His mind raced back to the boot prints pressed into the dirt. Someone had stood here pacing, torn between decisions. The broken branches showed haste, panic, desperation. The blanket and toy whispered of a child once held close, and the puppies, left alone in the world, begged silently for help. Slowly, a chilling thought formed in his mind. Had someone been forced to abandon a child here? Or worse, had tragedy struck before anyone could save them? The man swallowed hard, every nerve in his body screaming at the weight of the mystery. He wanted to believe the family had simply passed through, leaving forgotten objects behind. But his heart knew better. Puppies didn't beg strangers to follow them unless they were carrying a message. These fragile creatures had guided him not out of instinct but out of loyalty, clinging to the memory of someone they had lost. The forest floor beneath him was a graveyard of heartbreak, stitched together in fragments. He clutched the locket tightly, a vow forming silently in his chest. He couldn't walk away. Whoever this mother and child were, they deserved more than to be forgotten in the shadows of a lonely roadside. And these puppies, tiny, trembling, and determined, deserved the truth to be uncovered. The man rose slowly, his eyes hardening with resolve. Whatever had happened here, he would find out. He owed it to the little ones who refused to stop begging until their story was told. The man stood frozen, the locket clutched tightly in his palm, his mind a whirlwind of questions. The puppies pressed against his legs, whimpering softly as though afraid he might leave. His heart ached at their fragile trust. Should he call the authorities immediately, report what he had found, and risk this becoming just another cold file buried in paperwork? Or should he dig deeper himself, searching for answers the world might never bother to uncover without his persistence? Every instinct in him screamed caution. He wasn't a detective, wasn't trained to unravel mysteries buried in the dirt. Yet staring at the trembling puppies, he felt a responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Someone had abandoned them here for a reason. Someone had left behind the belongings of a child. If he walked away now, if he placed everything in the hands of strangers, would the truth ever see daylight? Or would it fade into silence? He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the keypad, debating whether to dial emergency services. His conscience urged him to act responsibly, but his gut whispered another truth. Sometimes the system failed. Sometimes stories like this got lost in endless bureaucracy. The puppies barked sharply, startling him as though sensing his hesitation. Their cries were not just sounds, they were pleas. And pleas, he thought, weren't meant to be ignored. Not when innocent lives had been entangled in them. His eyes drifted back to the trail of boot prints disappearing into the woods. They weren't random, they led somewhere. A part of him wanted to follow, to see exactly where they ended, to uncover the piece of the puzzle still missing. But what if he found something too heavy for him to bear alone? What if the danger wasn't gone, but waiting deeper inside the forest? Fear knotted his stomach, warring against the pull of determination. Finally, he crouched, staring into the puppy's pleading eyes. "I don't know what I'm stepping into," he murmured, voice trembling. "But you didn't drag me here for nothing." His decision solidified in that moment. He wouldn't abandon them, not the puppies, not the unseen story they guarded. He slipped the locket safely into his pocket, squared his shoulders, and prepared to follow the path of footprints. The dilemma was no longer whether to act. It was how far he was willing to go for the truth. The man steadied his breath, his heart pounding as he followed the trail of boot prints deeper into the woods. The puppies trotted close at his heels, yipping softly, guiding him like tiny guardians. Every step heightened the tension. His ears picked up every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves. The forest wasn't just quiet anymore, it felt watchful, as though the shadows themselves were waiting. He gripped his phone tighter, ready to call for help if danger revealed itself suddenly. The prints grew fresher as he walked. Broken branches still oozed sap. Damp soil clung to the impressions of heels and toes. Whoever had made them couldn't have been far ahead. His throat tightened at the thought of catching up. Was this person a victim or something worse? He glanced at the puppies, their determination unwavering, as though they knew the way better than any compass. Each bark echoed like an urgent command. "Don't stop, keep moving, time matters." Finally, the trail opened into a small clearing. His breath caught. At the center, beneath a cluster of leaning trees, lay a collapsed figure. For a split second, fear rooted him in place. Was it too late? The puppies raced forward, tails wagging frantically, circling the body with sharp cries. The man forced himself to move, legs heavy with dread. Kneeling beside the figure, he found a woman. Thin, pale, her clothes torn, lips cracked. She was alive, but barely. Her chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. Her hands clutched her abdomen where bruises marked her skin. Her body curled in pain. A faint moan escaped her lips, stirring the man's resolve. This was no mystery anymore, this was life on the edge of being lost. He grabbed his phone and dialed frantically, shouting their location into the receiver. "Send an ambulance, fast." "She's still alive, but she's fading." The operator's voice was calm, but his heart thundered too loud to register comfort. The woman's eyes fluttered open briefly, locking onto the puppies. A weak, trembling smile crossed her face as tears slipped down her cheeks. Her voice was no more than a whisper, broken and fragile. "You found me." The man swallowed the lump in his throat as the sirens roared faintly in the distance, growing closer. Against all odds, the puppies hadn't just begged for help. They had saved the only person who could reveal the full story hidden in the woods. The puppies circled the woman with frantic energy, their cries rising louder as if urging her to stay awake. They licked her hands, nuzzled her cheeks, their small bodies trembling with relief and fear all at once. The man had never seen such devotion in creatures so young. They weren't just strays, they were guardians, tethered to her by something deeper than survival. Their reaction told him everything. They hadn't begged for themselves. They had begged to save her. As the sirens grew louder, the puppies barked sharply, their tails wagging, then stiffening each time the woman's eyes closed. It was as though they were pleading with her not to drift away. One pawed at her arm while the other pressed against her chest, their tiny whimpers relentless. The man's throat burned, How could such fragile creatures carry such heavy responsibility? Yet here they were, refusing to give up, fighting for her life with everything they had. The woman's lips quivered again, forming words the man barely caught. "Don't leave them." Her eyes shifted weakly toward the puppies before fluttering shut. The man clenched his fists, nodding even though she couldn't see him. He understood. These weren't just her pets. They were her family, her protectors, her last hope when she could no longer cry for help. And in her most desperate hour, they had done what no human might have managed. They had found someone to save her. The puppies continued their desperate dance until the ambulance burst into the clearing, red lights flickering through the trees. Paramedics rushed forward carrying equipment, voices urgent yet calm. The puppies barked furiously at the strangers at first, bodies tense, tails low, guarding the woman like soldiers defending their post. It took the man kneeling beside them, whispering soothing words, for them to step aside reluctantly, their eyes never leaving her fragile frame as hands lifted her onto a stretcher. Even as the paramedics worked, checking her vitals and securing her to oxygen, the puppies padded close, refusing to be left behind. One whimpered at her feet, the other pressed against her shoulder, riding with the stretcher as far as they could before being gently pulled back. Their cries pierced the air, raw and heartbreaking. The man gathered them into his arms, whispering, "She's going to be okay." And though they couldn't understand his words, their trembling bodies slowly stilled against his chest. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, news of the rescue had already begun to ripple outward. A passing motorist had seen the flashing lights in the woods and posted about it online. Within hours, the story of two puppies leading a stranger to a woman in need caught the community's attention. Curiosity turned into concern and concern into compassion. People wanted to know who was she, how had she ended up there, and what role did the puppies truly play? At the hospital, nurses gathered outside the emergency room doors, whispering in awe as paramedics recounted what had happened. "Two puppies?" One asked, disbelief in her tone. "They actually found her?" Another shook her head, eyes wide. More than that, they refused to leave her side. The story spread through the halls like wildfire, lifting hearts heavy with routine, reminding everyone that miracles sometimes wore fur and had wagging tails. The man who had followed them was asked to give his statement. Sitting in a small waiting room, he explained everything: how the puppies had refused food, how they'd led him into the forest, how their persistence had saved a life. Officers listening to his account exchanged glances, clearly shaken. One finally muttered, "If not for them, she'd be gone." Plain and simple. They wrote it down, but no paper could capture the weight of what had transpired. Meanwhile, volunteers from local shelters began to call in. They had heard about the puppies and wanted to help. "We'll provide food, medicine, whatever they need," one insisted. Others reached out offering temporary homes, blankets, donations. The small creatures that had once stood trembling by the roadside now became symbols of hope, binding an entire community together in compassion. Strangers who had never met suddenly felt connected through the loyalty of two little lives. Reporters soon arrived, cameras flashing, microphones raised, eager to capture the story. Yet when they asked the man for his thoughts, his voice cracked. "This isn't about me," he said, looking down at the puppies curled against his boots. "It's about them. They didn't just save her. They reminded all of us what loyalty and love really mean." The community, touched by his words, began to see the puppies not as victims of abandonment, but as heroes who had rewritten a stranger's fate. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. Doctors and nurses moved swiftly, surrounding the frail woman as she was wheeled into the emergency ward. The man watched through the glass doors, the puppies pressed tightly against his legs, their eyes following every movement. The rhythmic beeping of machines, the hurried instructions from the medical team, all of it underscored the fragility of her life. She was fighting for every breath, and yet, somehow, she had held on long enough to be found. The man could see the bruises on her arms and the shallow rise of her chest as nurses worked tirelessly. He clenched his fists, feeling helpless. He had done all he could. Now her survival rested in their hands. The puppies whimpered softly, their bodies trembling, ears flattened as if sensing the gravity of the moment. It was as though they feared that without her, their world would collapse entirely. They pressed closer together, seeking comfort in each other. Hours stretched painfully long. The man sat slumped in a chair, the puppies curled against him. Nurses walked past occasionally, offering brief updates. "She's stable for now," one said. "But she's weak. Very weak." Every word weighed heavy. The man stroked the puppies absent-mindedly, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "She'll be all right. You found me in time. We'll make sure she gets through this." He needed to believe those words for the puppies and for himself. Finally, a doctor emerged, removing his gloves. His expression was grave, but not without hope. "She's resting now," he said gently. "Malnourished, dehydrated, suffering from exhaustion and internal strain. But she's alive, and with care she can recover." Relief washed over the man so strongly it left him weak. The puppies yipped as if sensing the shift in tone, tails wagging hesitantly. The doctor glanced at them, shaking his head in disbelief. If not for them, she wouldn't be here. Moments later, a nurse allowed the man and the puppies into her room. The woman lay pale and fragile, but her eyes fluttered open at the sound of the puppies' paws against the floor. Tears welled as they scrambled onto the bed, pressing against her weak hands. She whispered hoarsely, You saved me." The puppies licked her face, whimpering in relief. The man stood silently in the doorway, heart heavy, realizing he was witnessing not just survival, but the unbreakable bond between love, loyalty, and life. Days passed, and the woman slowly regained her strength. The puppies never left her side, curled against her feet like tiny sentinels. The man visited daily, bringing food and checking on her progress. Finally, when she was strong enough to sit up, she asked to speak. Her voice trembled as she recounted her story, how she had been on the run, abandoned by someone she once trusted, forced to survive in the woods with nothing but her newborn child. The man's eyes widened. "Child?" he whispered, confusion etching his face. The woman nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She explained that she had given birth weeks earlier, alone and terrified, but with no resources, no support, and her health deteriorating. She had collapsed, leaving her infant hidden, wrapped in the very blanket the man had found. Her voice broke as she admitted she thought her baby hadn't survived. The locket, the bottle, the toy, they were all her child's. The room grew silent, the weight of her words crushing the air. The man felt his chest tighten as he realized what the puppies had been trying to show him all along. They hadn't just been leading him to her, they had been leading him to both lives. The belongings in the dirt weren't discarded memories. They were desperate remnants of a mother's fight to protect her baby, even when her body could no longer carry the burden. A nurse stepped in then, carrying a file. She gently explained that when search teams combed the woods after the rescue, they had found something astonishing. The baby, weak but alive, hidden safely beneath brush, wrapped in the blanket. The man's knees nearly buckled. The mother gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands as tears poured freely. Against every odd, her child had survived, and the puppies, loyal to their fragile family, had begged until someone finally listened. The shocking truth rippled through the hospital like a storm. Not only had the puppies saved a woman on the edge of death, they had protected her baby too. They weren't strays abandoned by chance. They were tiny heroes bound by loyalty so fierce it had carried them through hunger, fear, and exhaustion. The man, overwhelmed, looked at them in awe. "You didn't just save her," he whispered. "You saved them both." The twist changed everything. This was no rescue, it was a miracle of love. The hospital room no longer felt like a place of despair. It had transformed into a sanctuary of hope. The mother held her baby in trembling arms, her tears of relief soaking the child's soft blanket. The puppies nestled close, their tails thumping gently against the bed. The once weak woman now radiated a quiet strength, her smile fragile yet determined. She whispered words of gratitude, her voice breaking each time she looked at the man who had answered the puppies' desperate cries. Recovery was not immediate, but each day brought progress. Nurses and doctors marveled at her resilience, often pausing at the doorway to witness the remarkable scene of mother, child, and puppies healing together. Volunteers arrived with food, blankets, and supplies, their kindness pouring in from every corner of the community. The puppies thrived, gaining weight and energy, while the mother slowly regained color in her cheeks. Hope blossomed in the very place where despair once lingered. The man, though still haunted by the discovery in the woods, felt comfort in watching the family's transformation. He had not expected his life to intertwine with theirs, yet now he couldn't imagine walking away. He visited daily, sometimes bringing toys for the baby, sometimes treats for the puppies. The bond between them deepened quietly, naturally. The woman often whispered, "You were meant to find us," her eyes filled with gratitude that words could never fully capture. The community, too, embraced the story as their own. Local shelters and animal lovers rallied around the puppies, calling them little angels. Families who had once overlooked strays began to see them differently, inspired by the loyalty and courage of two fragile lives who had changed everything. Even strangers who read about the rescue sent letters, donations, and prayers, touched by a story that reminded them of the power of love and persistence, even in the smallest of creatures. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the man stood in the hospital garden watching the mother, baby, and puppies together. The scene was simple yet profound. Life restored, hope renewed, love unbroken. His heart swelled with quiet joy. The scars of the past would remain, but healing had begun. What had started as a desperate plea by the roadside had blossomed into a miracle. The puppies had not only saved lives, they had restored faith in humanity itself. Weeks later, the story of the two puppies had spread far beyond the hospital walls. Newspapers, television stations, and online articles carried their tale of loyalty and love. The mother and her baby, once on the brink of being lost, were now symbols of survival and hope. And the puppies, no longer trembling strays, had become heroes, embraced by a community that vowed never to let them suffer again. The man often thought back to the moment on the roadside when he first saw them standing with paws lifted, begging for help. At the time, he hadn't understood the depth of their plea, but now every detail made sense. Those tiny creatures had carried a message too heavy for words, a cry for life, for love, for a second chance. And against all odds, their message had been heard. In the quiet of one evening, the man visited the family. The baby cooed softly in her mother's arms, while the puppies bounded across the floor, their tails wagging happily. The woman's eyes glistened as she whispered, "They didn't just save us. They saved my faith in people." The man nodded, his chest tightening with gratitude. In that moment, he knew their story would live on forever. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with others, because the world needs reminders of loyalty, love, and miracles in the most unexpected places. And if you want to hear more stories that will move you, inspire you, and leave you in awe, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another tale as unforgettable as this one.